No, you can have whatever you want. Thank you. Come last when you sit in the back row.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Coastal Studies Institute. My name is John McCord. I'm the head of our Public Engagement and Outreach Program, and I'd like to welcome you to our last installment before our summer break of the Science on the Sound series. This is a monthly lecture. I see a lot of familiar faces that come to a lot of our lectures here. It's a monthly lecture series that we hold throughout the years. We usually take a couple-month break in the summer because everyone's busy, and we'll kick it back off again in September. Couple housekeeping things. Restrooms are right in the lobby, right behind the wooden wall. We're really excited to have Joe Madison here today to talk to us about the Red Wolf Recovery Program. We are going to have chances for questions at the end of the program, both from our audience that's in the room as well as our online audience. We are streaming the program live to YouTube right now. And so when we get to that question and answer period, we'll have two folks heading down the aisles with microphones. Please use the microphone to ask your question. It not only helps with voice reinforcement in the room, but it also allows the online viewing audience to hear the question as well. So why don't we go ahead and get started. With great pleasure, I want to introduce Joe Madison. He is the North Carolina Program Manager and Wildlife Biologist for the Red Wolf Recovery Program. Joe has been a biologist for the federal government for over 26 years, including the last 6 years with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's Red Wolf Recovery Program. Joe has spent the vast majority of his career as a federal wildlife biologist, working on various aspects of endangered and at-risk species management, including direct species management, habitat management, National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA compliance, Endangered Species Act, consultation, collaborative partnerships, and etc. on species such as red wolves, Cuban boa, California condor, gray wolves, sea turtles, black bears, grizzly bears, Canadian lynx, and more. We're excited to hear about Joe's work and the work of the Red Wolf Recovery Program. Please welcome Joe Madison.
Thanks, John. I'm really glad to be here because I could talk red wolves for hours and on end, and I typically do that to my kids, so they prefer I talk to somebody else for a change. But actually, my oldest kid is actually here, so she must not hear it too much at home. There's a lot of information to cover. It's a very complex, as a lot of you know, this is a very complex program. It's a very complex species. The history is long and immense. There's no way I'm going to be able to cover it all, so I'm going to skim a lot and try to move through it quickly so we're not here all night long. This is 2225. This is the breeding female out on Alligator River of the Milltail family group. She'll be present a lot throughout this presentation, and somebody in the audience took this picture. Okay, I'm going to start really basic. I don't know folks' understanding of red wolves or what they are or what they aren't, so I'm going to start with the basics. Red wolves are a distinct species. They're not a hybrid of any other two wolf species. If you mate a gray wolf with a coyote, you don't get a red wolf. They're a distinct species. They are size-wise in the medium size range between a coyote and a gray wolf, however. They're only found in the United States, and they are, unfortunately, the world's most endangered wolf, which is a terrible moniker to have. We'd really like to not be in that position. A little bit of history. The last red wolves were pulled from the wild in Texas, Louisiana in the late 70s to start a captive breeding program. And then they were reintroduced into eastern North Carolina in 1997, starting on Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge. The population has had some ups and downs. We'll talk about that briefly a little bit later. But the most recent history and the title of the program, the revitalization, and we started being allowed to get back to the practices we knew could be successful for red wolves really back in late 2020, 2021. But in 2022, the Department of Interior officially recommitted to red wolf recovery here in North Carolina and potentially range-wide. This is a map of the historic range of red wolves. It covered the entire southeast, went as far west into mid-Texas, up into Oklahoma, Illinois, and as far north up into Pennsylvania. The red portion here shows you where the last remaining ones were captured in the late 70s, and then of course where it appeared for the only existing wild population right now. This is a map of the current eastern North Carolina red wolf population. It covers the 5 counties in this area: Dare, Terrell, Washington, Hyde, and Beaufort County. We do have red wolves in all the counties, even though the population isn't great. They're kind of spread out in various places. We don't have a lot in Beaufort County, and we'll get into the distribution a little bit later. As you can see, there's multiple national wildlife refuges, but wildlife refuge lands alone is not enough land acres to support a viable population of red wolves. So the red wolves do rely on private lands to survive. We are currently going through the recovery plan revision for red wolves. It's been a long process, as most recovery plan revisions are. It's a large group of about 50 plus individuals on the red recovery planning team in all sorts of different disciplines: genetics, behavioral, education, outreach, law enforcement, state wildlife agencies throughout the historic range. So it's a really diverse group. The final recovery plan is supposed to come out in September of 2023. So we're cranking through it right now. Some of the main points is that we recognize we need to expand distribution. Regardless of how well the population in North Carolina may do in the future, it's still not enough. We need additional populations throughout the historic range. What that exact number will be, where that exact location will be, that hasn't been determined. We also need to increase the population size, both in captivity and in the wild, just from a pure numbers and finding mates and viability standpoint to increase the genetic diversity long term. And we also need to implement collaborative conservation. We do a lot of that already, but that's a key piece of that, is to increase that and to increase the stakeholders that we are actively engaged with and develop new processes that make landowners and others feel like they're part of the decision-making process and not us imposing red wolves on them. The next step down after the recovery plan this fall, we'll start developing the recovery implementation strategy, which basically is taking what's the overarching stuff in the recovery plan and getting it down into more of a cookbook of how you're actually going to go about doing it on the ground. And again, carrying that out in a collaborative way. For us in many things, communication is just as important as the biological side of this thing. The decrease of population after its high of 120 in 2012, a lot of that wasn't tied to ecology and biology. It was lots of other factors, socio-political, all that kind of stuff, so that we need to do a better job of addressing that as we go forward in all forms. The media, with our outreach, with bringing stakeholders in to participate in the process, all along the way. The SAFE program, which is saving animals from extinction, that's the captive population. That's a key point, key process for us. We can't, it's not like the Yellowstone reintroduction. We can't drive up into Canada and get red wolves out of the wild and bring them into North Carolina, right? This is the only wild population, so we don't have that source. So we have to be, as we're trying to regrow this population, we rely very solidly on the captive population. There's currently 49 zoos and wildlife conservation centers nationwide that have red wolves, and there's approximately 284. I mean, it changes daily, of course, with births and deaths, but that is the highest number that it's ever been in captivity. So that's pretty amazing, and it's continuing to grow. We had more litters born in captivity than any previous year, and that will continue to grow. We're starting to increase the space capacity in these facilities and designing the enclosures differently, larger enclosures, further from roads to prepare them better for the wild. And that's a key point that they're trying to work on, is to increase the captive population and do husbandry assessments in conjunction with us. And we're also, the Mexican wolf has the same types of issues that we have. So the Mexican wolf program, the red wolf recovery program, and the captive management programs for both species are meeting jointly multiple times to work through these things and try to find ways to make these wolves more successful upon release into the wild. And some of the facilities are looking at creating pre-release sites, which instead of say a normal, half acre pen or 1 acre pen, it's going to be more like a 10, 15, 20 acre pen where they are really removed from human interaction. The SAFE program is about a lot more than just breeding. One of the key things that they're really good at is the outreach and education portion of that for red wolves in general, and fundraising and all sorts of different aspects that they are involved in. And we coordinate with them on a regular basis. Another key part of this whole thing is that off the Gulf Coast of Florida, there's a red wolf island propagation site. It's St. Vincent National Wildlife Refuge. And on that site, on that island, we try to maintain a pair of breeding red wolves in the wild. They breed in the wild, they raise their litter there in the wild, and then when the pups reach dispersal age, we attempt to capture them and bring them up to North Carolina for release. And that comes into play a little later on as well. I say attempt to capture them because we can't always capture them. So sometimes there's a few more on that island than we planned. But there is currently 1 pair of red wolves on St. Vincent. That's actually them in the photo. We have not documented a litter there yet, but some of the monitoring indicates that they may have had a litter. So we will keep monitoring that, and hopefully they did, because then that'll set us up for bringing them here. We are continuing to operate under the Endangered Species 10J rule. It was revised in 1995 that gives us the authority to do what we're doing in conjunction with applicable court decisions along the way. The most recent and one that we're working under right now, a district court issued a ruling that the Fish and Wildlife Service need to draft a plan to release captive red wolves back into North Carolina, since we had suspended doing that. Subsequent to that, we have drafted, finalized, and implemented Phase 1, 2, and 3 release plans that covered from March 2021 through May 2023. A lot of what I'm going to talk about tonight is results of the Phase 3 release plan, which, as you see, we just quote-unquote ended in May, but believe me, it's ongoing constantly. And we've already begun work on the next phase of the release plans. The goals of the Phase 3 release plan was to focus on pup fostering opportunities whenever possible. Pup fostering is when we take a captive-born pup and put it into a wild den. And so there's a lot of factors that have to line up for that to even be possible. The pups in captivity have to be born within 2 to 3 days of the pups born in the wild, and we have to get them in the den before they turn 14 days old, because the older they get, the more likely the mother is to reject them. And when they're 10 to 14 days old, their eyes aren't open. They can't crawl out of the den before the mother comes back. Because when we go into the den, the mother leaves. And then we put the new pup or pups in there and rub them all together with the existing pups. And then we get out of there, and then she'll come back and nurse them. So that's the key. That is the most effective way to increase the population and increase the genetic diversity. But you have to have breeding pairs to do that. And until last year, we didn't have any breeding pairs in the wild population since 2018. So it's kind of hard to foster when you don't have any denning females. We didn't foster last year into that litter because she was a first-time mom, and that's not ideal. She's still trying to figure out what it takes to have pups that survive. So the other key point of Phase 3 was to try to increase breeding pairs within the eastern North Carolina red wolf population. That's what the ENC-RWP stands for. To do that, there was kind of a step down of the best to most likely to be successful to the least, and it was there was an unpaired wild female on St. Vincent National Wildlife Refuge. We'd actually tried to catch her the last couple of years, and she had avoided capture. So the plan was to try to capture her again this year and to pair her with a captive-born male in an acclimation pen here up in North Carolina, and I'll show acclimation pens in a bit. Attempt to pair any unpaired red wolves in North Carolina with captive-born males, because then the wild wolf can basically teach the captive-born animal how to survive in the wild, so they're not trying to figure it out on their own. And then lastly, we're to release a captive-born family group on Pocosin Lakes National Wildlife Refuge. This picture is 2197. She is a wild female red wolf on Pocosin Lakes National Wildlife Refuge, and one that we fostered into her den in 2021. And if you're keeping track of the numbers I'm throwing around, I said there wasn't any wild litters since 2018, but we fostered with her in 2021. She actually had a hybrid litter, and because we had such low population numbers, we took that opportunity to foster red wolves into her den, and she raised them. And now those 2 that survived, we fostered in 4. Pup survival in the wild is about 50%, whether it's wild pups or fostered pups. 2 of the 4 survived and are still on the landscape, and they factored into number 2 there of pairing an unpaired red wolf in the wild with a captive-born male, and we'll get to that as well. Okay, so the first part of that, on April 20th, we confirmed that the Miltel pack did in fact have a second litter for a second consecutive year. They had 3 females and 2 males. That's them. Oh, I keep pushing the go-ahead for the, that's them there. And because she had 5, there was 1 litter born in captivity, couldn't have been any further away. It was in Point Defiance Zoo and Aquarium, which is in Tacoma, Washington. But because of the need for population and the increased diversity and genetic diversity, we decided we'd only foster 1 pup in because we didn't want to overstress, because she already had 5, and there's still 5 pups from last year. So there's, she still had them around too. So we on April 24th, when they were about 13 days old, we fostered in. That's this little guy here. He was flown. He actually flew commercial airlines to Raleigh. And we fostered him into the den the next morning. And then last week when I was out there, I saw all 6 of the pups with some of the adults at about a half a mile away. And that's the first real evidence we've had that the pup fostering was successful. So they've gotten past the earliest stage where mortality is high, but of course there still could be mortality as we move forward. But of course we hope not, and we'll continue monitoring that as we can without disturbing them. They're in a great spot very far away. I don't think most people are seeing them out there these days, and not that I don't want people to see them, but I'm kind of happy about that. And we try to stay out there too. So to get ready for the next phases or the other potential opportunities that phase 3 has, we constructed acclimation pens. We had 4 out there. We had 3 on Pocosin Lakes National Wildlife Refuge and 1 on Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge. And where we put these pens is kind of dictated by what is happening on the landscape, where we have red wolves, where we don't have red wolves, because some of them we constructed within the territory of existing red wolves because we wanted to catch them and put them in a pen with a captive-born male. Some of them we constructed in areas of really good habitat where there are no red wolves because we hoped to get a pair to stay there, and we felt like they could be successful there from a habitat security, prey availability standpoint, and those kinds of things. From November through March, we conducted capture operations in St. Vincent National Wildlife Refuge, Alligator River, Pocosin Lakes National Wildlife Refuge, and on private land with landowner permission. And part of that, we collared the 5 yearlings that were born last year in Alligator River. And it's that orange collar was key to get on there to identify them as a red wolf, and I'll talk about that again in a little bit as well. I guess I'll talk about it right now. All captive-born red wolves that are going to be released and wild red wolves are collared with the bright orange GPS or VHF colors. They all have VHF, but some of them are GPS in addition to that. And they have orange reflective material on the side, which is crucial in making them more visible along highways. And so they don't get misidentified. The leading cause of mortality in red wolves is gunshot mortality. The second leading cause is vehicle strike mortality. So both human-caused mortalities that we're trying to reduce through various means, and the collar is one way to do that. The collar is orange, identifies them as a federally protected species under the Endangered Species Act, and that killing or harming them is illegal. And to look closely for orange. Most hunters, most people know orange means don't shoot, so we're trying to rely on that, and we do a lot of outreach in addition to that to get that word out there. I try not to even use pictures without orange collars now of red wolves in my presentations and stuff. I know it's not as beautiful, but to me it's an animal that's more likely to survive out on the landscape. So we felt a great deal of pressure to collar all of those yearlings that are in the Miltel area, because historically animals born on Miltel, when they disperse south off of the refuge. We also have highway signs that we place out in various locations. We have 6 of them. We've purchased some. The Red Wolf Coalition has purchased some, and the North Carolina Wildlife Federation has purchased some. And we place those in areas closest to the main roads where we're going to release red wolves to alert drivers. And we also move them around, as the red wolves move around if they're staying in any one spot or in localizing, which that has become a program in and of itself, playing musical highway signs. You guys have probably seen the ones on Highway 64. Those really, the intention was not to put those there and leave them there, but every time we think about moving them, we've got some other wolf that's in that area, and we're like, okay, we're just gonna leave them there forever. But those signs, they were intended to reduce vehicle strike mortalities. I don't know if scientifically if that is the case or not, but they sure as heck have increased the visibility and awareness, and people know the presence of red wolves. So that in of itself, I think, has been very helpful. There's also places where we have a difficult time getting in touch with landowners, and we put the sign up, like just one up on Shore Drive that has my cell phone number on it. So that's a better way, it's an easier way for us to get in touch with folks if we need to. All right, so this is what actually ended up happening from our plans. In November 22, we did capture the female on St. Vincent National Wildlife Refuge, and then she was placed in an acclimation pen on Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge with a captive-born male. And then in 2 separate times, 2 of the wild females, both of which were the fosters that I mentioned from 2021, private trappers actually caught them both separately, one in November 22 and one in February, and they were both placed in acclimation pens within their territory on Pocosa Lakes National Wildlife Refuge with captive-born males. And then in December 2022, we got a family group from the SAFE program, and they were placed in an acclimation pen. It's actually November, but the results of that, of the 4 pairs we had in acclimation pens, 2 of them had pups while in the acclimation pens. So in the past, we had released red wolves typically when the female was in heat, because we had scientific evidence and past success that would keep the male staying with the female once they left the pen. But in the last couple of years, our previous releases, they hadn't been staying together. So through consultation with additional scientists and the Mexican Wolf Program, we had some success with leaving them in the pens until they had pups. Even if the pups didn't survive, they have a greater chance that the pair will stay together. Now, obviously, we want the pups to survive. That's a key point of all this. So we left the pairs in the pens longer this year than we typically do. 2 of them didn't have pups, and 2 of them did. The 2 pairs that did not have pups, we released on May 2nd and May 3rd, and those pairs did not stay together. And I'll show you, we'll talk about that as we go through this. The family groups, so the two pens that did have pups, we waited till the pups were about 6 weeks old. Our concern, at first we were like, well, we'll release them when the pups are 2 weeks old. The female will have a stronger drive to make sure she stays with the pups. But a lot of times, once these animals leave acclimation pens, they're very leery of going back through the threshold of the pen, especially wild ones. You'll see in a video a little bit later, the captive ones aren't quite as leery doing that. But so we waited till the pups were about 6 weeks old so they would have the ability and enough mobility to follow the female and male out of the pen, and they wouldn't have to go back in to get them. But that was not without many days of debate and worry about the right timing. Because we have a lot of bears out here, as most of you know, so the pups in the pens, it's a concern if a bear gets in there. One of the ways we keep the red wolves in the pens is an electrified dig line around the base of the fence on the interior. Well, we had to turn that off because we can't have pups walking into that. So we were balancing this concern over their safety with the concern over their safety. And there's no right answer. It's trying to figure out the best way. This is the release of this is a wild female, the one that was fostered 2 years ago. So she's only a 2-year-old and she had a litter. So fingers crossed, if she survives on the landscape, she could have lots of. There's one of the pups, obviously. That was the captive-born male that went by it first. So that family group is, some of this is our interpretation / wishful thinking, but that family group is relatively near where we released them, because those pups, they're mobile, but they're not traveling miles and miles, which is kind of the point, right, of why we did it this way. But the parents are leaving and coming back, including the captive-born male. He is going out and coming back. He's been a little more visible than we would like, and I hope over time he gets a little more stealth with what he's doing, but he is going out and hunting and coming back. So that's key for a captive-born male. But, and again, this is our interpretation of what we're seeing while we're monitoring. The first couple of days, the breeding female, who's a wild red wolf, was going out with him. And they're going off refuge to where she's hunted her entire life. Now she doesn't go with them all the time. And it seems to us that she did exactly what we hoped she would do. But we'll see over time. This is the captive-born family group on Pocosin Lakes National Wildlife Refuge. This is not when they first left the pen. This is after they got a little more comfortable going in and out. And then this is just them in the daytime to give you a little bit better look at.
Are the pups at Alligator River about that size right now?
No, they're about a month older. They're not a month, but they're a couple weeks older, 2 weeks older. I only saw big ears above the corn. I did not see the full body. So after release, when we know the red wolf's on somebody's property or a wild red wolf, any sort of amount of time, if they're just blazing through, we can't call every landowner the property. And you'll see on one of the maps why that's not possible. That's all we would do 24/7. But if we know they're spending any amount of time there, we are contacting the landowner to let them know of their presence, which is kind of a 180 from what we used to do. And because we want to address their concerns up front, and we want them to know they're there, so there's not an accidental misidentification. And we encourage folks to talk to us anytime with questions or concerns. We have a 1-800 number hotline that actually rings to, not to me, but a lot of people, they have their program biologist of choice that they like to call with, but we encourage people to do that. That's what we're here for. We try to respond to all calls, texts, and emails with questions and concerns and everything as much as we possibly can, and we address any time-sensitive issues 24/7 as much as possible. We track and monitor every newly released red wolf every day. We have the GPS collars, we have them set when we initially release them to send us a point once a day, and it's at 8 a.m. It's the 8 a.m. point. But sometimes we get that 8 a.m. point at midnight, so that's not overly helpful from a management standpoint. It's really good to make cool maps like that you can show, but it doesn't really help you from a management standpoint. So we are still going out every day, even the ones that that could in theory get a point, to find where they are, see what they're up to, and do what we can. We are, for the captive-born ones in particular, we are placing supplemental food whenever feasible, wherever feasible, to help them transition into the wild, which again is a balance. Especially the captive-born ones, you don't want to put so much food out that they just sit there and wait for food to show up. They know how to hunt, but do they know that they have to hunt to survive, right? So we try to balance that. We want to keep them alive, we want the pups to be sustained, but we don't want to make them just sit there and wait for the weekly rations to show up. So we do feast and famine. We did it in the pen too. We'll feed them a lot of food, then we'll wait a long time, give them a little bit less food and that kind of stuff to try to get them ready. Wild red wolves they're all wild now. Once they're out of that pen, they're not captive anymore, and all bets are off as to what they're going to do and where they're going to go. But all wild red wolves that have been out there a while are tracked multiple times a week and more as needed. There's certain times a year, like when around denning season, we will track the females every day to see when they localize, and that tells us when they gave birth. And we also have a lot of remote sensing cameras out there. My biggest thing is be careful where you use the bathroom in the refuge. We don't want to see that, and you don't want to see that. There has been 5 mortalities in 2023, but 4 of them, we're sad to see them go, but 4 of them were older red wolves and appear to have died from natural causes. Some of them have had necropsies to confirm that. Some of them are still pending. But we had some really old wild red wolves out there. There was a 13-year-old and a 14-year-old, which is the oldest wild red wolf on record. I don't know what the oldest red wolf in general was on record, but that's getting up there. And that she was just a mortality last week. We also did have one mortality of one of the newly released captive males. The cause of death has not been officially determined on that one. One of the newly released males, he stayed on the refuge for a couple of weeks, and remember I said the pairs didn't stay together that didn't have pups. He stayed on the refuge, seemed to be doing good the first couple of weeks, and then he moved into an area that had several houses that had chicken coops and garbage cans and all that kind of stuff, and once he was in there, despite us repeatedly hazing him over 4 or 5 days, he was not leaving that spot. So we captured him, and he is now back in captivity, unfortunately. We currently have 16 known, which means radio-collared adult red wolves out there, and the 13 pups in the wild. So that's gone up quite a bit, which is scary to say that 16 has gone up quite a bit. We also, 10 of those have the GPS collars that I mentioned. They all have the orange collars, except for the pups. The estimated total wild population is 32 to 34 right now, which includes the pups. It also includes red wolves that we think may still be out there whose radio collars have died, so we can't track them anymore. Or when we see something on a camera, I was like, well, that kind of looks like a red wolf, but it's not collared. There's not a lot of that right now, unfortunately, but there's a little bit of that. This is the population over time. You can see it was growing steadily and was up above 100 easily, and it was probably higher than that. But this is the end of what was known. And then it tanked. But you can see that we have, we've made some progress, and we're at least at the moment heading in the right direction. There's still a long way to go, and a lot of obstacles. There's a lot of positive, but I'll show you this too. We've also, this is a 2-year difference of the age class structure. And not only are the numbers completely different, but if you look at it a little closer, we've like completely flipped the age class here in 2 years. They were all, and this is 2 years ago, and all of those had survived until the last 4 months. So all of the, move those all up to, it was all old based, no young, no prospects coming in. And just with the fostering we did 2 years ago, and then the pair that's on Alligator River, that male, we brought him up from St. Vincent to pair with the wild female on Alligator River. And then they started having pups. So it's kind of flipped. Which is good. We'd like to have some older ones, but you need those younger ones to fill in behind and to reach breeding age and have pups of their own. And each one of these efforts and releases and births and that wild births, they give us pieces to work with. Where instead of us having to release a completely captive-born family group, if there's one out there that's not paired, that gives us something to work with. We can try to pair them with somebody instead of kind of going from scratch. We're very dedicated and passionate about these individual animals and the population as a whole, but it's a bit of a numbers game right now that we're playing as we try to rebuild the population. Here is the general distribution of the current red wolf population of those 16. These two, they're moving so much. I just picked a spot, really, and I'll show you one of their movements. But that just gives you a general idea of where they all currently are. That's one of their distribution of what I call the dispersing female. That's a wild red wolf. That's not a captive born put somewhere they don't know and figure out what's what. She was doing this before she was captured and put in an acclimation pen with the captive-born male, and that doesn't represent one loop. This is 3 separate loops through all of this. I need to be more straight on to do that accurately, but that represents 3 separate loops of her making a trip around Lake Phelps and around here and then down into here. She's been almost on Alligator River a couple of times, and then back over and around, and then, I'm not sure what she's looking for, but I hope she finds it at some point. We did not have a GPS collar on her previously, and we spent a lot of time trying to find her. I'm very grateful she's wearing a GPS collar now. I should say GPS collars, there's plus and minuses. The battery life is not long because you're getting more data out of it, so it doesn't last as long, so you lose sight of the animal in the long run earlier, although the technology is getting better. But we have VHF collars in track for 8, 9 years. Probably the outmost we're going to get out of this is 5, but 6. They also, a GPS collar costs costs a little over $2,000, and a VHF collar costs about $300. So there's a price involved too. This is a year's worth of points for the blue is the mill-tail male who's wearing a GPS collar. So you can see they're pretty tight to the farm fields as their territory. They go into the wood blocks adjacent sometimes, but they're not doing a whole lot of traveling. They're pretty tight. And this, like I say, it's about a 10 to 15 square mile, which tells you a lot about the prey density there, because an average, the range, they say in the literature for a red wolf is 20 square miles to 80 square miles. Well, they're hanging tight to 10 to 15. And unlike what I was expecting, when these, especially since they're yearlings now, they've decreased. Even before the pups were born, they're using a smaller area than they were. I thought once the pups started getting bigger, they'd have to expand, but they've kind of tightened it even. The yellow dots are the breeding female. She doesn't have a GPS collar, so those points are during the day when we're tracking her. That's another wild female, just to give you a sense of the type of habitat she's using, largely to the farm fields and then in some of the early successional habitat in the forested areas. All right, I'm probably going. The adaptive management strategy is a key part of what we're trying to do. The adaptive management strategy was developed by a group of scientists to try to reduce hybridization and interbreeding between coyotes and red wolves. It entails removing some coyotes from the landscape and sterilizing others and re-releasing them. And it's based, whether you remove them or sterilize them is based on the location and the current red wolf presence in a general area. But if you sterilize and release coyotes, they act as placeholders. They can't breed and they can't hybridize with red wolves, but they maintain their territory. You can't just spay or neuter them. They have to be left hormonally intact so they continue to defend their territory. So they'll be in that territory until a red wolf pushes them out, basically, because red wolves will displace coyotes and not the opposite. So we have a program to sterilize coyotes for private landowners that allow sterilization on the land. It's done at no cost to them. It's actually paid for by the Red Wolf Coalition, which is great. All the sterilized coyotes are radio collared. They have white collars now. They used to have black. There's some of both out there. There's actually 26 sterilized coyotes currently out on the landscape, and we capture additional ones every year. It reduces hybridization. It can reduce the coyote population locally, and it can benefit landowners or land management goals. About 3 to 4 coyote home ranges fit inside a red wolf home range. So you're going to have a lot more canids in the landscape if you've got coyotes instead of red wolves. We have a program called Pray for the Pack, where we will provide funding and technical assistance to landowners for them to do land management that they want to do on their property. And in exchange, they allow red wolves to be present without being harassed, and allow us to do some level of monitoring, and then up to their comfort level to us to do coyote sterilization. It's all based on what the landowner wants, though. And they take a while to develop because we tailor it to each individual landowner and what they're hoping to get. The Red Wolf Center is a key part of our community engagement. It's up in Columbia if you haven't been there. Kim Wheeler has been key to this for a long time. The front part of it is an education and interpretation outreach center, and there's a 2 captive red wolves in a pen in the back. The back part of this building is where we do collaring and health checks of red wolves and things like that. It used to be a pretty nondescript building until this spring. It took a long time, but we got this mural on there, which I think has beautified it quite a bit, and hopefully has made the community feel a little more ownership and pride in the building. And that was a big project with a lot of local volunteers and community members that worked on that. Some key collaborations that we have that I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about. The Red Wolf Coalition has a depredation compensation program. There's only been 9 depredations in the 36 years of the program, but it's always a concern with landowners So that program helps to put their mind at ease or potentially tolerate red wolves, knowing that if there is a depredation, that they'll be reimbursed. We also have something we're piloting this year. We're actually starting Friday. We're going to have red wolf teacher ambassadors out on the landscape. That's a collaboration with the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences. And local high school teachers are going to work with us this summer and provide outreach out on the refuge, just talking to folks that are out there about red wolves and red wolf management. And they're going to help us do some radio telemetry with tracking and some remote camera work so that they get a sense of what it's all about, and then they can take that back to the classroom. And as part of their program, they're developing lesson plans for schools as well. We also have a trapper reimbursement program, which is very key. Fox pens are a thing in North Carolina. You can trap coyotes and sell them to a fox pen who will teach them to train dogs. We don't want any red wolves to end up in that. So we have a trapper reimbursement program that's collaboration with North Carolina Wildlife Federation. Well, we will pay a trapper if they believe it's a red wolf or they don't know. If they hand the animal over to us, we will reimburse them more than they would get if they sold it to a fox pen. Those 2 female collared red wolves that I told you about that private trappers caught, that's what helped them to transfer those animals to us instead of some other potential outcome. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say that I don't work for the National Wildlife Refuge System. I work for a division of Fish and Wildlife Service called the Ecological Services. The refuges obviously are a key component of all this. And we work very closely with them. How can you help or get involved? Contact the Red Wolf team directly with questions, concerns about red wolves. We're available to work with folks to address concerns or answer questions. I speak to several of you in this room on a regular basis right in that regard. Don't shoot collared canines. It's illegal to shoot red wolves, and it's likely to your benefit not to shoot a collared coyote because that means they're sterilized and they're keeping out other coyotes. Drive with caution in red wolf areas and engage in red wolf efforts similar to this or public meetings or do comments on recovery plans. Support the local economy by using area businesses, outfitters, lodging, food while you're visiting national parks to see red wolves, for a chance to see red wolves in the wild. Especially in the smaller communities outside of the Outer Banks, I think it would be helpful to let folks know why you're there at that, at their restaurant or their store or whatever, or using their service, that if you're here to see red wolves. And visit one or more of the 49 zoos and wildlife conservation centers nationwide. There's several in North Carolina. Also, if you own land within those 5 counties, become a Pray for the Pack participant. We would love to grow that program and have as many people, and you can receive funding and technical assistance towards your goals. There's the contact information for the Red Wolf Hotline and then my contact information. Luke Lawless is the private lands biologist that works with folks on the Pray for the Pack. And then Emily Weller is the Red Wolf Recovery Program coordinator. She's out of Louisiana, but she's here often, especially these days, which is good. She's actually here right now. And I wanted to leave with this. This video, I like this video for lots of reasons. Maybe I'll wait and say why after so I don't. I love that video for lots of reasons. One, just the fact that there's that many red wolves in one place, because a couple years ago, that's damn near how many red wolves we had on the entire 5-county area. So that in and of itself. But I like that there's multiple forms of communication. They start out with the howls, 2 of them, and they snap their heads so hard when they hear a howl in the distance. And then they go to that whole yip yap stuff. But then when they stop, it's like dead silent. There's like that last little, and then there's nothing. And that's like 3 separate forms of communication in one video, and that's the Miltel family group. Yeah, that's it. I personally think that's the I'm sick of photographers look, but no offense to any photographers in the. No, you can't ask any questions, no.
So I know the releases, you've released more captive males than females. Is that, I'm going somewhere with this, Joe.
Well, you're actually picking up on a point that I forgot to point out, that I was going to point out in the age class. You know, because there's a lot of positives here, but there's also big concerns. There's only one wild adult male out there on the landscape. One, and that's the one on Alligator River. He has 2 sons, but they're yearlings, so you know they'll get there hopefully. We released 4 males, 4 captive-born males, because we had the pieces of the wild females, which is why we shifted more to the male. But 2 of those males are already off the landscape, one from a mortality and one back into the. So we're still short males out on the landscape.
So my question was, of the family groups that you've released coming from captivity, have the females been more successful on the wild or than the males, or have you not had enough to really make any sort of statistical?
That's a really small sample size, because especially in the newer, we've only released 2. Now, are you talking captive-born family groups, or are you counting the family groups, the pups and the pens, because they're now family groups, of course. If you're talking completely captive-born, the male was more, neither one was, first one was not successful. Those animals were not as, they were too habituated to people. So that I don't really want to draw a lot of conclusions. They were both unsuccessful. One of the female was hit by a vehicle, the male was put back into captivity. This one, they're hanging really tight to the, so they're doing great. They're staying remote, they're staying unseen. My concern is they're not moving enough. It's like, start moving, but don't go anywhere.
I'm wondering if the planting of the crops was somehow related to the timing of the new litter being born for the Milltail family.
No, I mean, they've got a pretty tight window of when they give birth, and the females tend to have birth the same. You know, different females give birth at a different window, but they seem to be really close. Like she gave birth April 9th last year, April 11th this year. So I think that's more of a her thing than necessarily the crop planting. Den selection
my question being, did they wait to plant crops until after she died?
Oh, did we tell them to wait?
Yes.
No, but we coordinate with the farm. I talked to the farmer today. We coordinate very closely on what they're doing and where they're doing it, because obviously we don't want anything, you know, when there was 20 litters born a year in the wild, then we didn't necessarily, I mean, we didn't want anything bad to happen, but with only 1 wild litter, you can bet we're being very sensitive about, that's why there's road closures. We marked fields today that for him, the farmer, to stay out of, you know, so we're keeping close tabs on it. Microphone, she's got one here in the front.
Years ago, when there was a large population, I went to a couple of wolf howlings that were held out there, led by a gentleman who lived among them for about 9 months. And I wondered if you have any educational programs going on or a plan for the future that people can go to.
Yeah, you can blame me for the end of the wolf howling tours. I'll take the heat for that one. That was going to close to Sandy Ridge, which at the time we held captive red wolves there. And so you were howling to the captive red wolves and they were howling back. That's a great program, and it was actually the only downside, but our focus needs to be on the wild population. So over time, working with the SAFE program leadership, we transferred out the animals that were living back there permanently and then kept the older ones until they passed away. So June of 2021, we no longer have captive red wolves back there to conduct those howling tours. And howling to the wild ones, while it would be really cool, is actually a form of harassment. So it can have a negative impact on them, their movements, or draw them in and those kinds of things. So we don't currently have that. There is a red wolf program that the refuge does every Friday evening at 6. 6? Don't quote me on the time. Kat Ramos, who also runs the interpretive education at the Red Wolf Center, does it on Alligator River. And she gives a talk, and then they drive the area where you may, along the public accessible roads where you may see red wolves. If you go to the Red Wolf Center and wait for a siren to go by, you'll hear them howl.
I've got a couple online questions real quick. The first is, are you finding most landowners are positive to having red wolf populations on their property?
No, I would not say most, but I would also say it's not as negative as it's sometimes portrayed. So we have, and the official human dimensions stuff kind of says a third oppose it, a third are kind of neutral, and a third are pro red wolf or pro. But a lot of times the issue isn't necessarily red wolves. It's the feeling or the loss of private property rights that comes along with red wolves, or just having government people on their land is what they're not. Or a lot of times, I mean, you guys know where we live. A lot of times it boils down to water, and they're concerned about water, and that gets intertwined with red wolves so much. But I'm not trying to paint this rosy picture that all landowners love red wolves, because that's definitely not the case. We have some pretty vocal and opposed folks, and we try to engage with them and bring them into the process as much as we can. We currently have a conflict resolution specialist that's working with us to help develop a process to better engage with landowners and to build that rapport and that trust in a way that they feel like their voice is heard in our management decisions. And Pray for the Pack is one small way that we're trying to do that as well, is to work with them and see that they can have benefit from having red wolves on their property.
And one more question online. Given the increase of the coyote population in eastern North Carolina and the ability of coyotes to mate with red wolves, what behavior of the red wolf will keep it from becoming just a hybrid population?
So when there was a healthy population of red wolves back in the 2011, 2012 timeframe, the well-established packs, and they had most of eastern North Carolina was covered with red wolf packs, and there was very limited hybridization. It was occurring on the outskirts of that, not in the core area. So the thing is to get them back established as packs, and keeping them alive. Human-caused mortality disrupts breeding, especially during the breeding season, and they may end up pairing with a coyote. But the combination of the coyote sterilization, adaptive management, and those types of activities, along with the healthy population, does keep down sterilization and on the landscape. So it's a difficult task. Now think about, we're talking about reintroduction to other areas. There's nowhere within the historic range of red wolves where there's not coyotes. It will be intensive management at the beginning, but if you reach a certain threshold of a population, and with that, then it can be maintained over time.
So you showed us a sort of bell curve of the population up and down over time.
I can't hear you, sorry.
I'm sorry. You showed us a kind of bell curve of the population going up and down over time.
Yes.
What caused it to tank?
Well, that was what I was referring to. That's a hard question to answer. It was a lot of factors. It was kind of a perfect storm of stuff, but it wasn't. There was a lot of gunshot mortality at that time. There's some things that change on the legal aspect. There were some challenges. There were some social pressures and issues. There were some leadership concerns, and so it was a lot of stuff. But I can tell you at that time, a lot of activities that were done previously were suspended. There was no pup fostering happening. There was no releases happening. There was very limited coyote sterilization occurring for between about 2014 and 2019. That's about as diplomatic of an answer as I can give.
Is there a concern for household pets? And I notice the Depredation Act does not cover the loss of a household pet.
Well, I can't answer the last part of that question because that's not, I don't run the depredation program, but the number that I cited, the 9 depredations over the 36 years, that does include pets. So yes, there is a concern, but it doesn't happen on a, it's not a normal occurrence. And wild red wolves don't want to come anywhere near, they're very shy, reclusive. Now, captive-born ones definitely are a little bit more likely, which is why we're trying to be very selective on what captive ones we pick. But even the captive ones that have been over the last 3 years that have gone into developed areas like that one, there have not been any depredations on pets. But that is not to say that a small dog or cat or something could not be taken. It happens a lot more frequently, though, with coyotes, which are a lot more comfortable being close to residents in developed areas. Kim wants to answer the last part of that question.
I will. I'll be happy. I'm Kim Wheeler with the Red Wolf Coalition. So we run the depredation program. So I'll be happy to talk to you how we came to the conclusion. Well, I'll just tell everybody how we came to the conclusion. The depredation program does not include household pets or domestic pets versus chickens or goats, because we really felt like people would be more responsible for their household pets, and that you would take them in at night versus an animal that's left out in a pen that might be subject to some sort of canid that might come along. But I had a question for you, Joe. So what do you do if you're on the refuge and a wolf approaches you?
Well, it kind of depends on the circumstances, but the biggest thing is you don't want that red wolf being comfortable approaching you. So if you're on a road, paved or not, paved is irrelevant, and that wolf is approaching you, the first thing you should do is probably just leave the area and keep a distance between you and that red wolf. But if it's coming up to you like it's been fed before, which we did have some instances of that, then scare it off, yell at it, make it uncomfortable being close to you. That's not where we want them. We want them to have that fear of humans. But whatever, you need to remove yourself from that situation and not let that wolf do that. If it's coming walking down a road, it's a judgment call. If it's just traveling and you're in its way and you just need to get out of it, or if it feels like it's approaching because it's you and you need to scare it out of the way.
Joe, I know that the speed limit out on Pungo, the Pungo unit of Pocosin Lakes, is posted at 25 miles an hour. And I know that the website indicates, and there's now a sign, I appreciate the signage, that says 35 miles an hour at Alligator River. Is there any possibility that the speed limit on the roads within Alligator River Refuge could be lowered to 25?
So it's my understanding that they are being lowered and they're just waiting on the signs. I'm not, that was the last update that I heard, but I don't work for refuges again, but I can speak to them and see if that's the case, and if it's not the case, then we can talk about that, yeah. I don't know who the heck would drive 25 in Pungo personally, but it's on some of those roads.
I'm sure you're limited on resources. And you showed that you only have them on an island in Florida and here in Eastern Carolina. When you showed the range, which was quite a substantial range, is there any plan to reintroduce red wolves elsewhere, especially where you have large federal lands like in the Appalachians or such?
Yeah, there are plans to reintroduce them to other areas. Like I said, the exact number or the exact locations haven't been determined yet, but that's one of the priorities of the Red Wolf Recovery Plan revision, is to reintroduce them in other areas. There was another population in the Smoky Mountains back in the 90s, and it was pulled after about 5 years. And I won't go into that, but yes. And as far as being spread thin from a resource standpoint, yes. Not necessarily from like a equipment standpoint, from a personnel standpoint, it's hard to cover it all. The hope is if we reintroduce to another area, and here as well, that it will be more of an interagency, not necessarily agency, but it will be other organizations that have people that are helping to actively manage it. So Fish and Wildlife Service is not the entirety of the folks on the ground doing the day-to-day monitoring and the things we do here. So that would help with that burden somewhat. And of course, state involvement is key no matter where we are, including here.
So thank you all very much for your participation. We can answer one more question before we wrap up.
Can you speak briefly to what threat is posed to the pups by the black bears or the bobcats?
It's a straight depredation. You know, bears will eat anything, and the pups are pretty small and vulnerable and not mobile. So if a bear finds the den when there's no adults around, look, that kind of thing, then they'll prey on them. We don't see it so much, and we don't have a camera at the den because we don't want to disturb them. I don't know that bobcats are necessarily an issue, especially if any single red wolf was around, but bears have definitely been a cause. It's not a major, and obviously the red wolves have survived here in eastern North Carolina for many years and with bears. But honestly, we don't have a lot of specifics on what the causes of mortality are in pups because we're so hands-off and don't want to disturb the dens. The one time a camera was put at a den, like 15 years ago, the female abandoned it, so we're like, yeah, we're never doing that again. So, but it's just straight depredation.
Great. Well, thank you everybody for being here, and thank you, Joe, for the presentation.